Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Membean Training. On the side where there are the shapes on Google Meet, there's a poll going. So the poll, it just asks if you've ever used Membean before. So yes or no, just so we kind of know who has used it and who hasn't. That would be awesome. Also, before break, we created an account. So once you log in today, you should just sign in with Google. And then Elizabeth will be leading the session. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we will try to answer them as best as we can. All right, Elizabeth, all set.
Okay, so we've got a lot of information we're going to try to give. Hopefully it's not super overwhelming, but we'll try to get through it and leave some time at the end for questions. I know you guys have another presentation at 11, so I'll try to wrap it up by 10:45 and give you guys a little break. So this is just the basics of getting started with Membean. And the goal for today is you already have your teacher invitation, or you hopefully already created your teacher account. So I'm just going to go over what's next. How do you get set up? How do students know your expectations? And also some best practices for you. Just generally, I am a former Ohio teacher. I'm located in Northwest Ohio. I'm a proud Ohio University graduate, and so I'm really happy to meet with you guys today. If you have any questions at any time, I know that I'm leaving time at the end, but if you have an immediate question, please drop it in that chat and my coworker Shayna will be happy to help. So if you've never used it before, Membean is a web-based, personalized, multimodal vocabulary program, and it really emphasizes differentiation and long-term retention. Our words come from a variety of reputable sources: the College Board Vocabulary Study, published SAT and GRE tests, the BNC Google Web Corpus, the Living Word Vocabulary. Probably my favorite from this list is published fiction and nonfiction books from the Common Core. For example, if you're reading The Great Gatsby with students, there are 294 words in Membean from The Great Gatsby. So sometimes teachers want to take a break from Membean because they're reading The Great Gatsby, not realizing we're already teaching your students words from those books. So it's really easy to create a long list of words, but we really focus on creating a specific list that's going to be important to your students, both academically and personally. They're very carefully culled. So when you log into Membean after creating your teacher account, you probably have a screen that looks kind of like this. And so the first step is to create your first class. To create your first class, you're going to either click the plus sign in the top corner or this green button that says add your first class. From there, you're going to see a question that asks you to name your class and to select the grade. You're going to want to select the lowest grade that's in that class. If you have multiple grades in the class, say 9th and 10th grade, select 9th grade. If your students are in 9th grade but reading at a 6th grade reading ability, you're still going to select 9th grade. The class names on your dashboard show up alphabetically, and students will see the class names. So name it something that they're going to recognize and know that they're in the right place. They don't have to follow your roster. For example, if you have a first period class that's really diverse by ability, you can create multiple classes that period. You can create as many classes as you'd like. You can add classes at any time and delete classes at any time. Step 2 is to decide if the class should be marked as ESL, ELL, or remedial. And you're only going to want to mark that, this checkbox that you see here, you're only going to want to mark that if the entire group falls into this category. There's several settings that are adjusted automatically in the trainer when students are marked this. And so don't do it if only some of the group is needing these accommodations. You can always go back and mark individual students who need accommodations later. If you mark a class as ESL or ELL, here are some of the things that are adjusted. First, if you have a 9th grade student, they're going to calibrate on a high school word list. But if you mark the class as ESL, they're going to calibrate on a lower word list. So students are automatically given simpler words. It will also automatically give them an accommodation for time and a half on training questions and their assessments. And the trainer actually slows down the pace of introducing new words. So if your student is marked as ESL or ELL, it will slow down the pace of new words that they're going to see. Students are asked to spell out the whole word for fill in the blank style questions, and there are a couple other minor adjustments that we make to support unique learners like this. Step 3 is to figure out your game plan as a teacher, your expectations, and how long you want to give them to do the training. Regular training is really important. Consistency is key on Membean. So your next step is to decide how often you want your students to train and how long they have to complete that training. For example, maybe you want them to do our default, which is 3 15-minute days over a week. Or maybe you need something more unique, which could be 4 20-minute days over 2 weeks, or 9 10-minute days in 3 weeks. You get to decide how frequently you want to monitor your students. Next, you're going to set up your training cycle. This is the amount of time you're giving students to meet your expectations. Days on this screen, days refers to the number of days in that cycle. Begins every is when the cycle begins and it automatically recurs. And the end time is when the students need to complete the training by specifically on that day. To set your cycle goal, this is what you expect your students to do in that training cycle. For example, if your cycle is a 7-day cycle, what are you asking them to do in that 7 days? So days refers to how many days you want them to train on. Minutes per day is how long you want them to train on those days. And total minutes is just overall in that cycle, how much you want them to train. And these don't have to add up. You could have, for example, 2 days of 15 minutes, but the total might be 45. And so you're leaving it up to them if they want to do a longer cycle on certain days or not. Okay, so you've just set up your first class. It will pop up on your dashboard with whatever you labeled it, and it'll probably say 0 students unless you've already enrolled some. So the next step is to add your other classes. To add your other classes, you're going to click the plus sign in the corner right here, and it's going to pop up with an abbreviated version of what we just walked through. So create your class name, your grade, your training cycle and expectations, whether it's ESL or not, click save, and it'll populate on your dashboard. Any questions so far for me? Okay, we'll move on. To get students enrolled, as soon as you create that class, the only thing you're going to see in that class when you click in the class is how to enroll your students. It'll look something like this, and you're going to get a unique URL for that class. If you guys are using Google Classroom, it's really easy just to copy that link, post it in an announcement to your students of how to enroll by clicking that link. If they click that link, it will automatically put them in the correct class. The other option, this is kind of like joining a Google Classroom, is to give them this unique code. So again, you would share this code with them, then they would go to membean.com/enroll. It'll ask them to enter the code, and it will in that class. So the link, in my opinion, is the easiest option, just because then they just click it. They don't have to type anything in. You don't have a student saying, oh, I thought that L was an I or something like that. So kind of makes it foolproof for your students. As soon as a student logs into Membean, it's going to ask them to calibrate. This is the start of the personalization process on Membean, and it's going to look like what you're seeing on my screen. So it's going to give them a series of words. Some of them are snuck in there and they look real, but they're actually fake. So what we're asking students to do is click yes if they know the word well enough to use it in a sentence, or no if they don't. It usually takes about 2 to 5 minutes for students to complete this calibration. And what it's going to do is it's going to place them on a level within our word lists. So it's kind of gauging where they are in our word lists. from this 2 to 5 minute calibration. They only complete it one time. So if you have a 9th grader who completes it right now, when they move to 10th grade next year, they shouldn't need to complete it again. Any questions about this so far? Okay. So how do students know what to do? After they complete the calibration, what they're going to see up front on top of their dashboard is your expectations. So as a teacher, there's nothing that you need to assign every week or every day. There's not a lot for you to create or push out to students. As soon as you created your class, you set up your expectations for them. It essentially lets the students know what you expect of them each cycle. For example, this student, when they log in, they can see the expectations and when it's due. So right up top, you can see the cycle length for this particular student was July 26th to August 2nd, and it shows them the time that they need to complete that by. It tells them that they haven't done any training yet, and it tells them what training they have left to do, as well as their total expectations. In this circumstance, the student can clearly see that they haven't completed any training this week, but their expectation from the teacher is that they do 3 days of at least 15 minutes on those days for a total of 45 minutes. If they start completing some training, they'll see, instead of before where it said there was no training completed, it will show these progress bars. So each day in the cycle, they'll see as a gray bar. As soon as they complete a cycle, it'll show up as green for that day. And if they complete a partial day, it'll tell them how much time they have left to complete that day. So they always know what they have left to do and what they've done so far. For example, these update over here as well. It's showing them you have one more 15-minute day to complete. If they were to complete the 7 remaining minutes on the 28th, it would show that all 3 days were completed and they've completed their training cycle. So when they're all finished and they've met the teacher's expectations, they'll see something like this. We give them confetti, we say goal reached, everything is showing up as goal met for today and the cycle. It'll also show them their accuracy for those trainings. So what does a training session for a student look like? When they go in, they know that they're expected to train that day. They click start training. What do they see? Well, words are first introduced with multimodal word pages. I'm going to click this and it'll show you an example of one of our word pages. So this is a word page for antiquated. It's going to show them lots of different ways to learn a word. And the trainer will also pick up on each student's unique training patterns to determine what to show them next. But they're going to be shown lots of ways to learn that word, like through a context paragraph, memory hook, examples from real world texts like the New York Times or magazines. It's going to show them word parts and related words, synonyms, antonyms. It even shows them a word theater, which is a video clip from a TV show or movie which features that word. After they've studied a brand new word, it's going to either ask them a question on a word they've already seen, it might show them a new word that they've never seen, or it might ask them to review an old word that they saw a long time ago. So based off of their training patterns, as it learns those training patterns, it will decide maybe they need a really hard question on that word, or maybe they need to wait to see that word a little bit. So how does it work? How do we decide when to show a word, when to show a new word, when to review a word? We know that the human memory works like this. If you learn a word today, like malapropism, if I taught you the word malapropism today, I know that tomorrow some of you may have already forgotten it. Some of you may still remember. But we know that there's a quick decline in what we remember. Unless we continue to review rigorously, our memory will be lost on this word. So I'm going to show you a little visual for that. So if I teach you malapropism, some of you by day 2 have forgotten it. If I tell you on day 10, I'm going to test you on that word, then day 9, maybe you cram for that test, you ace that test on day 10, but by day 12, most of you have forgotten it already. And this is what happens, right? This is called the illusion of learning. Is we've all experienced this. We give students a big list of words to learn. We say, we'll give you a test on Friday. They take the test, they do well on the test, but in 2 weeks when that word comes up in the text, they've all forgotten the words. And that's because they cram for the test, but they don't remember it long term. What Membean is trying to do is we're thinking about how the human memory works, and we're charting the best learning path for each student. For example, how frequently do we need to reintroduce a word in order for us to remember it long term? We want students' memories to be stable and strong long term. So if I show you this visual again, the blue line represents what we're trying to do with Membean. We'll reintroduce a word every so often, and we'll space it out further and further and further. So eventually, we don't have to ask a question about malapropism because the student has remembered it, and they've shown that they've remembered it for a very long time. So we're trying to catch them up at the top, right? We're trying to stabilize that memory for each student. And we measure the strength of our understanding of a word in Membean for every single word, for every single student, every day. How can you tell if the student is actually learning those words? Well, we have assessments, and these assessments are awesome. You guys are going to love these. They're auto-generated, so you don't have to create them yourself, and they're auto-graded, so you don't have to do any grading. These are also personalized based on the training the students are doing. So each student has a different assessment based off of what words they're learning. You can create reoccurring quizzes, or you can create one instantly in a few seconds. You can also reissue an assessment at any time. We have 2 question types on our assessments. There are multiple choice questions, and I love these SATA style questions. These are select all that apply or multi-select style questions, and they're great test prep. To create an assessment, and you guys, if you don't have any students enrolled yet, you're not going to be able to see this yet. But as soon as you have your first student enrolled, you're going to see these tabs when you click into a class. And so to create an assessment, you would click on the Assessments tab. And from there, you'll see a big green button that says Create Assessment. And then it's going to simply ask you, how many questions do you want on the assessment? And do you want multi-correct sentence questions on there? And how many? You click Create, and it creates it instantly. There are some options, and Shayna might be able to tell you more specifically, because we've adjusted this because of COVID. I think you have up to 72 hours to complete an assessment now. It used to be 24 hours. So now we give teachers the option, do you want them to complete it in 24 hours, 48 hours, or 72 hours? To view a completed assessment or reissue it, you'll click that assessment, and you'll see a list of all of the students. You'll see the status. For example, if Dostoevsky hasn't yet completed the assessment, it'll say in progress or not started. If he's completed it, it'll show you the score. If you hover over the score, it'll show you the percentage. If maybe there was a fire drill during your assessment and the students didn't get around to completing it, you can reissue that assessment for that student just by clicking arrow and reissue, and it'll automatically read it. This is really nice. This was nice even before COVID because of missing work, always chasing students around for missing work. We try to make it as easy and fast as possible. Student comes to you, hey, I didn't do my assessment on Membean. Click, click, done. They've got it. I got this question every once in a while from some of my precocious students. I taught gifted and talented students, and they would sometimes ask this. They want to know how they study or prepare for quizzes. They don't. With normal, regular training, they're going to be quiz ready all the time because we're only pulling words for assessments that have a high likelihood of being answered correctly. And so if the student is training consistently and diligently, there's no extra prep work. The training is the preparation. How do you as a teacher monitor your students? The best way to monitor your students is by setting up your grading report. Again, you won't be able to set this up until you have at least one student enrolled, but as soon as that student is enrolled, you'll be able to set up a report that looks kind of like the one on my screen. Doing so will allow you to track your students' progress, identify any training patterns that you're noticing, good or bad, and to have meaningful conversations with students about not just meeting your expectations, but quality training, how to learn best on Membean. And again, when you get that first student enrolled, you're going to see this screen, and that is how you would create your grading report. So there's a big green button. As soon as that first student is enrolled, you'll click Create Grading Report. Shayna put together this amazing video. It's less than 5 minutes, and it is so worth it. It will save you so much more time in the long run, because this video is 5 minutes long, but it shows you how to set up your grading report, tips to saving you time long-term on your grading report. And I just want to throw out, even if you're not using Membean for grading purposes, set up this grading report. And we need to call it something else, because it's really more about understanding how your students are interacting with Membean. Can you trust your report? Maybe your student says, well, I did this, and your report's saying something different. Absolutely trust your report. Lost minutes are not a thing on Membean, even if the network goes down. Membean is crazy meticulous when it comes to record keeping. Every click a student makes is recorded, reported to you, and timestamped. So if there's a question at all and you're not quite sure, just email support@membean.com. They'll investigate and let you know what's up. Okay. We also got asked to cover some best practices. This is highly abbreviated. We actually have a full-length presentation on best practices, but I'm going to give you just the highlights of best practices just to get you going. Any questions so far before we start this? Okay. So best practices. The first thing you can do to encourage good usage is to educate your students about the science of learning on Membean. Membean's a little bit different. You know, we're trying to avoid cramming behaviors. We're trying to increase long-term retention, not just short-term gains. And that's going to change the way that your students perceive the program. And it's also about robust learning. So it's not just about a simple definition. So if you're explaining to your students how best to learn, it's going to improve their usage overall. So I've got a couple examples in this section, and these are just totally made up for illustrative purposes. There's no Jim or Jane or Jack in the real Membean world. So let's have this hypothetical here. Let's say Jim studies for 60 minutes the day before a quiz, and Jane studies on Monday for 20 minutes, and on Thursday before the quiz for 25 minutes. So in this scenario, Jim has studied a total of 60 minutes. Jane has studied only 45 minutes. Who does better on test day? Jim outscores Jane by about 5%. He gets a 90%, and Jane gets an 85%. But let's say that we wait 2 weeks and we test them again. Who tests better after waiting 2 weeks? What we see from the way human memory works is that Jim, who crammed the night before, forgets almost half of what he learned. So he forgets a ton, and he scores a 50%. Whereas Jane, who studied less, forgets less because she broke up her training. So this is what I was referring to earlier as the illusion of learning. Jim thinks he knows it, and if you only test him this one time, you as the teacher might think he knows it too. But we know long-term, he's probably going to forget about half. So on Membean, we ask students to space out their learning. Overall, it's less time the student needs to spend training, but long-term, it's stronger. Jane performs better long-term despite fewer minutes studying. Jim is building what we call momentary strength, but Jane is starting to build long-term habit strength. And that's the goal on Membean. Space it out. Students won't understand this at first. They'll say, well, why can't I do all my training on Tuesday? Well, because we want long-term memory gains. Okay, here's another example. Jim and Jack both study the same amount of time. Jim studies using only simple questions, and Jack studies using a mixture of mostly simple, but some difficult questions as well. Their immediate score might be 100% for Jim and 70% for Jack. Because he has difficult questions, he's probably going to miss a few. After 2 weeks, if we test them on the information again using only simple questions, what we see is Jim gets a 60%, whereas Jack, who had a mixture of difficult questions, is going to actually improve his score. So he will actually improve over that 2 weeks because of the way he struggled a little bit in the initial study. So what we've learned is that struggle strengthens memory. Durable learning needs desirable difficulty. The key takeaway with this is when you try hard to remember things or make an effort, your learning is stronger, even if you get a couple wrong. It's a myth that learning stress is always a bad thing. Easier isn't always better. So on Membean, what we're going to do is we're going to throw some difficult questions in there. We're going to ask students to struggle a little bit with their learning. So if there's some learning and growing pains on Membean, that's okay. It's going to help them a little bit. So encourage students to embrace the difficulty, knowing that they're going to remember more longer. So students will often be asked a question on a word that maybe they haven't seen in a long time, and they might get it wrong, and that might be frustrating, especially for your perfectionist students. That's okay. Make sure they understand this is desirable difficulty. Questions on Membean will sometimes be difficult no matter what. We have closed questions that are challenging. SATA questions are challenging. We ask students to recall a word from the bank of words they've learned with an image and associate them. Those are challenging. Getting things wrong or forgetting, it's okay. Make sure they understand that that is okay because it's all part of the struggle of remembering. Okay, here's another example. Jim and Jane both study for 30 minutes. Jim sees definitions, he's learning the definitions of the word, but he's also asked to associate a picture with the word. Jane learns just the definitions. After 2 weeks, what we find is Jim tests better. So what this teaches us is that learning the same thing in different ways is good. And we try to improve strong memory through teaching lots of different ways. The key takeaway is the more you know about something, the harder it is to forget it. If you have multiple routes that you understand how to get home from, even if there's high traffic or congestion, you can get home one way or another. The brain works the same way. You need multiple pathways to learn something effectively. So on Membean, you've seen the word page that I showed you. We give the students lots of different ways to learn a word. And they don't, when they look at that word page, have to learn everything the first time. Maybe encourage students to learn something different each time they see it. But students are going to ask, why am I seeing the same word page again? I've already seen this word. Make sure they understand you want them to learn all of the different ways that they can about a word. And that's going to improve their long-term retention. The second thing you can do, so the first one was kind of the science behind learning, and I just showed you some examples of that. The second thing you can do is to set your expectations very clearly with students. Some of the ideal expectations that we recommend are to train for 45 minutes per week, to avoid more than 60 minutes per week and less than 20 minutes per week. So there's some wiggle room in there. If you want to do 30 minutes per week, great. But even 20 minutes per week is going to be better than 20 minutes this week, no minutes next week. And we've talked about this too. Spacing your sessions is ideal, and explain why that's ideal for students. Consistency is really key on Membean. Students should have some choice about when they train. Maybe, some teachers will say, well, you're going to train 15 minutes on Monday, 15 minutes on Wednesday, 15 minutes on Friday. But maybe their schedule is busy after school on Monday. So it's okay to say you need 3 separate days, and we don't care what days those are, but make sure that they're spaced out. And try to avoid grading on one thing. Like if the student gets a 70% accuracy, you shouldn't just plop in 70% for that week on Membean. Consider a variety of factors, both the time goal met as well as the quality of their training. Set an accuracy threshold around 65%. And that sounds low, and your students are going to be confused by that at first. But remember, we're going to increasingly show them complex question types. We're going to increase the difficulty. It's normal to get questions wrong once in a while, and that struggle is good for memory. So as long as you, the teacher, understand that and you're looking at 65% as normal, you're good. The third thing you can do as a teacher is to monitor their progress. The primary role of a teacher on Membean is more of a facilitator or coach. So once you get that first student, right away set up your grading report. It's going to give you all of the information you need to monitor their progress. Your reports shouldn't take you a ton of time each week. We recommend 5 minutes per class each week. If you're spending a lot more time than that, reach out to us. Reach out to support. We'll try to give you some tips and recommendations to reduce the time. We want to save you time. Most teachers say they save about 2 hours per cycle on Membean that they are otherwise creating assignments or things like that. So if you're not saving time, reach out. We want to help you. Use your reports to notice any patterns. For example, let's say that you're paying attention to Sherwood because you're seeing some alerts in your report. Well, is this a 1 week thing? Or if you go back, is Sherwood Anderson consistently having the same alerts? So maybe if Sherwood Anderson has this one time, you're like, okay, he's probably fine. But if it's consistent and you're noticing that as a pattern, you'll want to address that with students. So again, if I see these alerts on my report, some of them, like this, I see Draco Malfoy has 33 dubious minutes out of 33 minutes trained. I don't want to encourage that. I don't want to give him credit. I'm going to definitely dock him points for that. But maybe Diana this week, she's got a lower accuracy than I want. She's below 65%. She's overtraining. Even though she's meeting my time goal and expectations, I'm paying attention to these alerts. And I want to look into that. I'm probably going to click this and have a conversation with Diana. I'm probably not going to penalize her for these 5 dubious minutes, but I am curious about what's going on with her training behaviors, and I'm probably going to have a conversation with her. One of the biggest things you can do is show that you're invested. And you can do this lots of ways, but the 2 biggest things you can do, the first is to devote class time to it, which I know some of you are like, ugh, thanks a lot. I don't have any time. And I understand that every minute in English matters. So if you can't, I get it. But if you can, even a partial session each cycle, it will make a difference. When you're willing to devote a little bit of class time to something, it shows the students that Membean matters. It will also provide you that chance to have those meaningful conversations about training behaviors and address any questions that they might have about training. You can also take time during that cycle to just have conversations about what they're experiencing on Membean. What went well during your session? What was challenging? What are the coolest things you've learned so far? I've even had conversations with students about the funny videos they see on Membean and which ones they liked, what the best words they've learned are. We have really creative. What was that? I'm sorry, was somebody asking a question?
Sorry, that was me. I wasn't muted.
Oh, okay. Okay, all good then. Yeah, a quick conversation, even if it's a couple minutes. Even if this is unique to Membean, I've never experienced this with my own custom word lists. When you start using Membean, students are going to get excited when they notice a Membean word elsewhere. So you might be reading a text or a short story and a student says, oh, that's a Membean word. Take that 30 seconds to praise them and say, tell us about that Membean word. Who else has seen this Membean word? Even your lower performing students are going to experience that, and it's really cool. This one's huge. I love this one. Train with your students. You can do this today too. If you, from your dashboard, you click this drop-down arrow, you'll see the option to train. You can go through the calibration process just like a student will. It will allow you to train just like a student will. I used to project my screen once or twice a year, and while they were doing a session, I would do a session, and I would let them see what I was training on, the words I was learning. I'd even, if I got a question wrong, they love pointing that out. Oh, you got a question wrong. And I'd be like, yeah, this is just a part of how we learn, right? So experiencing for yourself how the trainer works is really helpful in understanding what the student is experiencing. So if they have a question, you'll be better prepared to understand what's going on. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I am curious what kinds of questions we have. We've got about 10 minutes left. Do you guys have any specific questions for me? You might be overwhelmed as well, and that's okay.
Yeah, hi, Elizabeth. My name is Kristen Messner. I do have a real quick question for you. So it's my understanding, and I think I heard you correctly, one thing that I don't like about iReady is that a student can work for, it'll show like 90 minutes in one sitting. Like they worked for 2 hours and didn't really accomplish a whole lot. Sometimes I'm even wondering if they're just pushing play and they just kind of let it run. With Membean, I love, and if this is my question, if I'm understanding you correctly, like I can specifically control how long they work each day. So if, let's say I assign 2 days at 20 minutes, can they work past 20 minutes if they wanted to, or does Membean stop them?
Yeah, it won't stop them.
Oh, okay.
And what it will do, and I always had students, some of them would train a little extra just because they liked it or they saw value in it. We're not going to stop them from training. We don't have a way of preventing them from training. But it also will alert you as the teacher if they're just clicking through.
Right.
So
okay.
I'm going to pull up our demo account and show you what a report looks like, and we can look at that together and see some of the alerts. Shayna, anything to add while I'm doing that?
I was going to say, one thing to keep in mind is if you set 2 20-minute days, when they go and they start a session, when that 20 minutes is up, it's going to say, hey, you should probably take a break. A little screen will pop up when they meet your expectation, and they can click start continue training if they want to go beyond the 20 minutes. But they will get that reminder that, hey, you did your 20 minutes here. So just continue going. But also if you're requiring 40 minutes in a week and they two days per week, 2 20-minute days, and they do it all in one day, their dashboard will be telling them that they have not met your goals. So even if it's done 40 minutes, it's going to be like, hey, buddy, you got another 20-minute day here.
Perfect. Okay. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm just, you guys can see this demo account, right? Okay, so the report that you'll get as a teacher, you'll notice, for example, let's look at Nancy Farmer here. She's done 43 minutes of training. This teacher's expectations are for 45 minutes. She has not met the goal because she hasn't trained on 3 separate days. And so it's gonna show you, and it's also gonna show them. Any kind of training alert that the teacher sees on their report, the student will also see on their dashboard. So if they're getting flagged for dubious minutes, it will tell the student. The student will see their accuracy, they'll see their dubious minutes and what they are. So, they'll know right away. For example, Joe, he's messing up here, and it's telling him like, hey, we know that you were slacking off during this session, and we're alerting your teacher too. So Draco's going to know right away, shoot, my teacher knows that I did this. So it's helpful.
And if they are just, opening Membean, starting a training session, then they open a new tab and they're going to play a game instead, we identify when there's sessions of inactivity. So if nothing's going on the Membean screen for 2 minutes, 3 separate times throughout a single training session, they'll be marked as having dubious minutes. So they can't just set it and then go watch Netflix for an hour. If it's inactive for 6 minutes straight, we close the session on them. If there's 3 separate times throughout a session where nothing's going on for 2 minutes at a time, it'll show up on your report as dubious minutes. So you know if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
What other questions do you guys have? We still have a couple minutes. And also, Stephanie and David, if you guys are here still, if this is one of those situations you don't always know that you don't know until you get going. And so if you guys get going on Membean, and then maybe later on, if you want to set up another training, we can always do that as well. Even if you guys just have a department meeting on a Wednesday and you want me to pop in and answer some follow-up questions, I'm happy to do that too.
If there is no other questions, the next steps, David, his computer crashed. I don't know if he made it back on. Of course, you know, all the technology issues. But next steps would be to identify any students who have maxed out of iReady. So you need to look at your iReady rosters and figure out who has maxed out. And then we're going to go ahead and create a class for them in Membean, and we can start using the program. So look at your rosters, figure out who has maxed out, and then add them to your class. I'm still waiting for David if you guys need to ask for approval. I have not got that answered yet. So,
Stephanie, I have a running list, I think, of who
okay,
that is. Yeah.
perfect.
Hey, Stephanie and Patty, I have a question. Now we're getting ready to take the second diagnostic next week for iReady, and I know last year at the middle school, when I had a student test out the first time and they took that second diagnostic the second time, there were some students who did actually get put back into iReady. So should we wait until after next week to actually add our list of students once they take that second diagnostic for Membean?
Yeah, I think that's probably prudent. Yeah.
Yep.
And then my second question is on the hybrid model right now, and this is maybe more directed for Membean, but would it be best to do the 3 15-minute sessions or the 2 20 minutes? Or is that just teacher discretion?
I would say that's totally up to your discretion. As long as you're studying, 20 to 45 minutes per week, you're good. If you're trying to reduce screen time for students, you can bump it down this year. If you are okay with fitting in 45 minutes, you can do that.
Also,
Okay,
keep in mind your students. I know some of my students, there's no way they can't even focus for 3 minutes, let alone 20. So if you have kids who are going to get kind of squirrely, if they're doing the same thing for 20 minutes, 15 might be a better option for you. So just kind of play that by ear depending on your classes.
Yeah, or 10 minutes too. I had students, I would say, you know what, like this group, they're 10 minutes tops. And that was fine. We did 3 10-minute sessions per week, and that was still much more effective than skipping a week or doing too much training.
And then does anyone else have any other questions or concerns? I'm just putting a recap of the next steps for you guys in the chat. And then I will send the recording to Mike and Ryan, and then they can send it out to you guys or anybody that was unable to attend. That way, if you need to go back to any information, you have it, and you should be ready to go.
I am going to send a pre-recording of our full best practices webinar. It's really good. And Shayna is actually the one who hosted that. So I will send that to Stephanie. And then if she wants to distribute that, if you guys find value in it, you can. We have some live webinar. We're doing a live best practices soon, aren't we, Shayna?
I'll grab the link to the webinar signups and drop that in the chat.
Yeah, and then that always has a Q&A as well. So if you guys get going and you realize you've got some questions, we're available. You can always email support@membean.com as well. They're former English teachers. They've used Membean. They're very helpful, and they're more available than I am sometimes. So feel free to reach out to them if you need something quick.
So we do have some we're running live ones throughout January. So that first link there is if you want to join us live, but we also have the recordings of the ones we ran in fall if you want to watch it on your own time. So I put both of those links in the chat.
Okay, well, I don't want to keep you, but thank you so much, guys, for letting me meet with you, and good luck this year. Reach out anytime.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you, guys.